So this is a great little story that George Klein tells. George Klein, of course, GK, was Elvis's personal friend from the early days all the way to the end of his life. So he said he was so used to the commotion around him that he didn't seem to have much trouble falling asleep to the tapping and the whispering. George said, well, I had a harder time dozing off, but eventually I must have fell asleep because at some point I woke up with a start and realized that there was somebody standing in the bedroom. George went on to say, I bolted up in bed and reached over to wake up Elvis, but his side of the bed was empty. As my eyes adjusted to the dark, I realized that the figure standing in the bedroom shadows was Elvis. Elvis, you okay? George asked him, and Elvis mumbled something and shuffled around the room a little bit. Elvis was actually walking in his sleep. So earlier in the night, Mrs. Presley, Gladys, had pulled George aside and said that if he was going to stay over, George that is, that George should be aware that Elvis often walked in his sleep. She'd given him some tips on how to talk gently to Elvis to get him back into bed, so that's what George was going to try to do now. So George continues, Elvis, why don't you come back to sleep, he says softly. Huh? Come back to sleep, Elvis. Well, Elvis went ahead and mumbled something else and shuffled away from the bed. So George, he starts to get a little bit more concerned, and he stands up. But George, he didn't get close to Elvis because he didn't want to startle him. So Elvis kept talking like he was lost in thought, trying to work something out. And George continued to be concerned, because this is the very first night he stayed over at Elvis's house. So George kept gently asking him, Elvis, come back to bed. Now, we all know George Klein as a disc jockey that played Elvis's records on the radio, and Elvis did a lot of things for him as well. So finally, after a few nervous minutes on George's part, Elvis finally walked to the bed without any fuss, climbed in, and was out like a light. As for George, he was thrilled to be in Elvis's home, but his first night there, he didn't sleep too well. In the morning, Elvis didn't say anything about the night walking, and George didn't either. It was still early in Elvis's career and early in George and Elvis's friendship, but already George knew that Elvis was kind of a guy with a deep personal pride and knew this was the kind of thing that was more likely to embarrass him than be something he'd enjoy kidding around about. So Elvis took a lot of knocks from the press and the mainstream public in the early days, and when he let somebody into his world on a personal level, he did it with a great sense of trust, and George was not going to make anything of this. So while we're on this subject, my old music manager was Merle Kilgore. Now, Merle Kilgore was on the Louisiana Hayride as an artist. He was a disc jockey down in Louisiana. He was the gentleman that carried Hank Sr.'s guitar back on the Louisiana Hayride and ended up becoming Hank Williams Jr.'s manager. Now, Elvis and Merle were friends. Now, they weren't close personal friends for their full lives, but they were friends back in the day. And Elvis and Merle went on a lot of tours. Now, Merle doesn't get mentioned a whole lot because he really wasn't a really big artist, even though he had record deals. But he wrote Ring of Fire, Wolverton Mountain, More and More. Those are all, million-selling hits, if not 5 million selling hits. So anyways, Merle told me a story one time about Elvis and him. They're staying in the same room, in the same bed. And it's a longer story, but I can confirm that it was very difficult, according to Merle, for Elvis to get to sleep. Now, Merle didn't have any stories about Elvis sleepwalking, but he was bothered about something earlier in the evening, and he was on the phone talking to his mom for a long, long, long time. And Merle did say something to Elvis that kind of calmed Elvis down, and Elvis said, okay, I understand, I get it now. And he went to bed, and they slept in that little twin bed. And Merle's 6'4", and Elvis 6'1" or 6 foot tall, somewhere around there. That's one of the reasons why Elvis never slept alone. People think other things. I mean, why he had a woman in his bed every night, like Elizabeth Stefaniak in Germany, and why he always had somebody in his bed. It had to probably have to do something with the sleepwalking. Maybe he walk less when somebody was with him versus being alone. And maybe it was just to ensure that he didn't do something like walk down the stairs of Graceland and kill himself. It is a real problem out there, sleepwalking. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. And let me know what you think in the comments. Please like, please subscribe. Please hit that join button. Become a member if you can. And join the other members. I do little members-only pictures and videos for them before I release anything to you guys a lot of times. So TCB TLC.